much of what I've been talking about in this course has to do with my distrust and condemnation of much of the mainstream media, the media conglomerates that are businesses that have an agenda of war, basically aggressive warfare, because it's good for business. Since 1941, the economy of the United States has maintained something called a permanent war economy. After the invasion of Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States geared up for a major militarization, and that has never ended. The decision was made after World War II, although there was no one in sight who was remotely on the same level financially, militarily, and at that time it had a great deal of prestige. Nevertheless, the idea was, let's keep the military economy, let's build on it. And so that military economy has been maintained to the present day, and in the name of the war on terror, that military economy is growing. Now, last week we looked at a video on 8 steps to recognize terrorism. I'd say that has to be one of the most dark things I've seen in my lifetime. It is it's presented in a serious way by a quarterback, a major football hero. And basically, you can see that the agenda here is to create a police state, to create a situation where everybody is a spy on everybody. The 8 steps to terrorism: if you see somebody taking notes, if you see somebody taking a picture and you question what might the picture be of, if you see people exchanging money, in other words, if you see people doing things that are happen all the time in our society, but teach people to look at one another suspiciously as possible terrorists. It's interesting that none of the terrorists in the film were dark-skinned, looked like Arabs, looked like Islamic people. They looked like Americans, average white Americans. And I should really be careful with my language, because Americans are black, they're every type of background in the world. But all the people identified in the film as terrorists were Caucasian. Now, what I'm going to show tonight, you'll see a reference to dumbed down education. And that film, I think, is a perfect example of a media presentation done with the idea that the audience they're addressing has no intelligence, no interest or understanding of history. It's as if there is some manufacturing depot that makes terrorists. I mean, think of our history in Western civilization, if I can refer to Western civilization. Think of the French Revolution. Think of the American Revolution. Think of the Russian Revolution. Think of Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, or Patrice Lumumba in Congo, or Nelson Mandela, for that matter, and what we've talked about. Think of Mao Zedong. I mean, in case after case after case, you have groups of people who feel so bitterly oppressed and so put down by the governing system that they resort to arms. And this has been the way that history moves. If the people who made the American Revolution happen had been picked up and put in jail right off the bat and tortured as terrorists, you wouldn't have the United States of America. So, I mean, the country that is founded out of the citizenry, a group of citizens taking up arms to oppose the duly constituted authority of those days, the British Empire, I mean, they count as terrorists according to the present definition that we've been given. And remember that the thing that the founders of the United States were fighting against is the very governing system that we have in Canada to this day. And actually it turns out that King George and his descendants weren't all that oppressive. Queen Elizabeth basically does what she's told by her prime ministers. So this idea that we are being lied to and manipulated in a very, for very dubious and dark ends. And what do we do about it in the universities? What do we do about it in our places of work? So one of the things I'm trying to do and demonstrate and talk about and share with you is let's be our own media. We have that capacity. So last Thursday after class, I climbed into a plane. I drove up to Calgary, I climbed into a plane and flew to Amsterdam and then went to Paris. And I'm just getting back from Paris. And I have had an amazing view of things that I didn't know about or I suspected. In Paris there was an event called Vers la Vérité, towards the truth, towards the truth. And if you saw the clip that I showed last week on the 8 ways to recognize terrorists, you might have noticed that the site I was using is called 911blogger.com. So I am one of those who do not believe the official story about how the events of 9/11 happened. I don't say that I know who did it, but I know for sure that the version of events given within really hours of the terrible, horrific, mind-boggling things we saw in New York and in Washington. You know, we were given an explanation of who did it, what the motivations were. We were given that explanation within hours. And so obviously there is no due process, there's no careful investigation, there's no, we were told an interpretation, and that interpretation has continued to this day. And to question that interpretation has serious ramifications for some people. And I would say the event that is almost untouchable, or the position is almost untouchable, is that the events of 9/11 happened because of a breakdown in security, a failure of security. People were caught unaware. If I think about it, I could say from Dick Cheney, Vice President Dick Cheney, to Barack Obama, to Glenn Beck. Any of you watch Fox, that insane, war-mongering promotion of aggressive warfare, morning, noon, and night, or Naomi Klein for that matter, because Naomi Klein, she writes about the shock doctrine and the manipulation of shock and terror and awe to advance a certain economic agenda. But then when it comes to the biggest shock of modern times, the falling of the Twin Towers, she buys into, or at least repeats, this view that it's simply a failure of intelligence.